Hey, well, good evening and welcome to Is There More Than Life Than Netflix? This is where me and my good friend here, Andy, sit down for an hour and have a chinwag about all things meaning of life, faith, God, all that kind of stuff. Because we'd be doing it anyway, and we wanted to let you in on the conversation, but specifically, we want to be here for people who are curious or even skeptical about all of that stuff, about faith and even the existence of God and all that kind of. So we talked about all issues relating to that, and we always try and kick it off with something that someone has brought to us who is new to Christianity or not a Christian and has questions about it. And this week will be no exception. But before we get onto that, I want to introduce myself. My name's Dave. I am at Story House, which is a coffee shop and church up in Liverpool in Crosby. And this is Andy. And Andy, where are you at?
Hi, I'm over on the edge of Derby. We're on an estate called Mackworth. We moved here about 5-6 weeks ago, and we're just helping to, I guess we'd say, revitalise, re-energise a church. It's a church that was in existence, but it had a small faithful congregation, and so we're trying to do something new there and honouring what's gone before and trying to connect with the estate and get to know people. So if you're in Mackworth and you're watching, really good to see you. It's great to be here this evening.
Yeah, awesome. And for those who don't know us, we are both Church of England vicars, you might call us, but not necessarily in the way that you might understand it, in the sense of long flurry robes and all that kind of stuff. Although when the situation calls for it, we'll
Yeah, I did this week. Yeah, do you know what? It's really I so really wear one. My daughter, who's 8, bless her, she said, "Daddy, why are you wearing those funny clothes?" I was like, "It's my job." She says, "Your job to wear funny clothes?" I'm like, "Yeah, sometimes." But yeah, that's it shows how often I wear them. But no, I did this week actually. I had a funeral this week, so I looked official. For a
yeah, I love that. Is it your job to wear funny clothes? So it's like one of the more depressing moments of my life was I was at my in-laws for Christmas, and we were watching some period drama or other. And here's all these Victorian people in silly clothes, silly Victorian clothes. And there's the vicar wearing exactly what we started to wear. And I was like, oh my goodness. Wow. But yeah, we're not here to talk about that or therapy.
No, that's right.
We are not. So what we do is we normally base each week on a question that someone who isn't a Christian has asked us and is curious about Christianity. But this week, we've actually dug into one of the questions or assumptions underneath the questions. It's something that we keep bumping up to time and time again. It's the whole thing of identity. It's a bit of, it's never far from the headlines. It's like a strong undercurrent in our culture. I've never actually had someone come and directly talk about, what's my identity? Who am I? All that kind of stuff. But it's almost always one of the questions under the questions. It's one of the things you kind of have to deal with once you've dealt with the surface thing. So I thought that's why it'd be really good to get in and talk about this. But as always, it's kind of good to define terms, to talk about what we're talking about and what we mean when we talk about identity. So we're going to do that in a second. But before I do, just a little reminder that this always goes much more interesting when you pop your comments and questions into the comments box as you're watching. So whether you're on Facebook,
heckles, we haven't had many heckles, have we, Dave? In that time we've
I think 0 heckles.
Here, you can heckle tonight. Yeah.
yeah. That feel free to heckle, ask questions, contribute your deep and meaningful thoughts.
And I think if you're watching on my Facebook profile, then you may not be able to put a comment up, or the comments may not come up. I think it's only if you do it to an actual page that it comes up. So or from there's a couple of places for some reason the comments won't come up. So I think if you're watching us on St Francis Mackworth or you're watching us on Story House, the comments will definitely come up and we can respond to them. But I know occasionally, I think last week somebody put something up from my Facebook page and for some reason it just doesn't come through. So if you want to make a comment, please do it on the St Francis Mackworth page or the Story House page, and we should definitely be able to respond to that.
We will see those tonight, because tonight we are talking identity, this whole idea of who we are as people. So let's start with Pinocchio. Pinocchio, one of the, it was obvious that's where I was going. Like one of the classic all-time films, top rated, loved by everyone. And it's ultimately a film about identity. It's, am I a puppet? Am I a real boy? Becoming someone different, all this kind of thing. And then like we did last week, when you start running through fairy tales and films and all that kind of thing, you kind of realize the motif under a whole bunch of those things are who am I as a person? And when we tell stories like that, it means it's a question that we're all asking. That's what stories are. They're ways for us to experiment and figure out the answers to these big questions of life in a kind of fun, engaging way. So the presence of so many identity kind of stories, who am I really and who am I meant to be, would kind of indicate that a lot of us are asking that question. And then alongside that, as I was saying, you won't see it far from the news, identity politics around gender, sexuality, all of that kind of stuff, race. It has been just front and center in the news for a long time now. It's one of those things that when you go near it, people explode and get angry, and hopefully that won't happen tonight. So when we're talking about identity, that whole big subject of who am I, and then where do we go looking for identity? So I thought, Andy, it might be good if we just chit chat for a little while about people we encounter on the street and ourselves. Where do people tend to find their identity? And I would say, one of the big ones is still biological family. That's still even though family is struggling compared to what it has been in the past, and divorce rates are much higher and all that kind of thing, people still do find a core part of their identity in the family, which makes a lot of sense. It's where you spend all your formative years. It influences you massively who you are as a person. And indeed, even if that family has broken down, often that family breakdown becomes part of someone's identity. It's such a formational thing. So that's definitely where I see it happening in our area. I'm sure you've seen that one as well, Andy.
Yeah, definitely families in there. I think depending on which part of culture you are, for some people they stay very close to family, don't they? And they kind of live near one another. So one of the things I'm finding out about Mackworth is one of my new friends here. His family's been on the estate for 4 generations. So his grandparents are here, his parents are here, he's here, and his kids are here. So they haven't gone very far. And yet, I remember when we went to Ridley and we went to Vicar Factory and we went in normal and we came out as vicars. Most people there had been to university. Most people there had lived in various different parts of the country, and some people lived abroad. And so I think their sense of family was perhaps less. It was formational in their early years, but then perhaps less formational around their identity as they got older. But I think it's still, as you say, very, very strong.
Very strong. Closely linked, and as you've just talked about, is place. Like for some people, place is still identity forming. Where are you from? It's still one of those questions that we ask is, where are you from? Like that's, when you're, you're struggling for something to say to someone you're meeting for the first time. What you do, where you're from.
And often it can be a place of connection, can't it? And it's funny if you're abroad. We had a thing last year. We were traveling. We went on a bit of a road trip. My dad lives in the States, and we were out there, and we were driving through South Dakota, as you do. We're kind of going to Mount Rainier, and we stopped at this place, and we're in breakfast in the morning, and we're having lots of pancakes with no fruit, and it's very unhealthy. And I just started chatting to this guy I thought I heard a British accent. So I went up and said hello. And it turned out he was just from a few miles down the road on the edge of Nottingham. He was, from Beeston. It was just really funny. I was like, oh my goodness, this guy, was just from a few miles away. And he heard the accent. And so the fact that, he was British and we were British and we're in the middle of nowhere in the States, there was a kind of a connection there. There was a shared culture there, which, whereas actually we know, don't we, that when you're in the country, you see it with football teams and all sorts of things that can fragment. But when you're further away, suddenly you find something more to come. The things you have in common are greater. Perhaps the things you have that are different.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's interesting. Like identity in that sense is kind of a shorthand for a lot of things, isn't it? Like you say, if you're from the same kind of area, then you've got all these references like for food, music, language, all that kind of stuff. That's all like we get each other without having to say anything. And for us too, I guess part of our formation would be reverence, like part of the Church of England, but that's in itself that comes with a whole bunch of shared language and understanding and things that we could talk to each other about that would really confuse someone who wasn't part of that world, and we could use
and bore probably.
Oh yeah. I mean, there are plenty of people who got trained and then never stopped using that confusing language. Forgetting that normal people don't understand what you're talking about.
No, we have an ability to do that. Yeah, so I think places in there. I mean, I read a book a couple of years ago talking about somewheres and anywheres, and I think there's an interesting thing there that somewheres are people that are kind of very much rooted in a place and their identity is very local, and they kind of often live near family, and even if they go away to university, they often come back and those sorts of things. And then the anywheres are people that are often in their jobs are very mobile, in their kind of economic status, in their education, and they see themselves much more as citizens of the world, really. And could have much more in common with people in large cities in other countries as they do people just down the road. And just near us, there's a newer housing estate, and what's very interesting is you go into it. Whereas we got the bit we're in, and there seem to be lots of people that live very close to their families and very rooted in place. You go onto this new housing area, and the first thing it's got, and the signpost you go in, is it's got M1, East Midlands Airport, and Derby Railway Station or something. So it's pointing people away from the place and to how they can get away and get moving, really, because those people's identity wouldn't probably come from the place. They probably won't be there for that long. They're there for their jobs or because they've got nice houses or whatever it is, and their identity will be rooted probably elsewhere, maybe in their jobs. I mean, it's another place, isn't it? People find identities in their careers, in their earnings. Yeah,
and has to be said, football teams. That's living in Liverpool. That one's not really escapable. That one turns out it matters to people. I've heard
that.
Yeah. Some people kind of care and get tattoos of certain club crests and things like that. So anyway, so there's that whole thing. But it's interesting, actually, as we chatted about that, realizing things that used to be quite solid identities no longer are. So family used to be absolutely solid in absolutely everything. That was number one priority, all that kind of thing. And that's just declining type thing. It's obviously still present, but it's less stable than it's been in our country for a very long time. Place used to be absolutely solid. You'd be born and you'd stay in a single place. Like traveling was just not a thing. But now, obviously, it's so easy to move around in access to transport. It's just ubiquitous in a way that we just don't, we don't think about it. It's just around us. That means we don't have to be rooted, like you said. And so therefore,
for those who've got money, though, I think that's quite important to note, isn't it? If you haven't got money and funds, then you can't do that. But for those who do have money, then they are much more mobile.
No, that's really, really good point. And with that as well, again, like Korea used to be solid. It's one of those constant kind of boomer millennial conversations, is like, boomers expect you to start on a career path and be with that company till you retire type thing. But now it's the norm to have several jobs, several careers rather, in a lifetime. You wouldn't even specialize in one thing. You'd be kind of moving from one to the next, because of the rate of change and all that kind of thing. So actually, a lot of traditional identities have kind of destabilized, and therefore identity is a movable feast now. And then we throw onto that kind of essentially identity making software and hardware in the devices in our hands. Platforms like Facebook and Instagram and so on. They are kind of identity making machines where you can be like, I'm going to present to the world how I want to be seen.
Which is, that is huge, isn't it? The kind of I think we may have talked about it before, but I very rarely would take a picture of me loading the dishwasher and put it on Instagram. I put the beautiful walks that I've been in, or the fun times when I get to be with people, or and it's been said, hasn't it, that social media is a highlights reel, but actually you can construct an identity. In fact, there are friends of mine who I would say almost have created a brand. There's one person particularly, and I know why he does it, because he was working in that world, but his personal Instagram account was basically, coffee. The whole thing was about coffee magazines, coffee he was brewing, coffee this, and he'd kind of created his own brand for himself with, thousands of followers. And that was just and I don't think I'd ever seen that happen. You kind of know it happens with Instagram influencers, the kind of big people with tens of thousands of followers. But this is somebody, just a regular person in the street, and they were doing it for work purposes, but they were definitely constructing an identity around a caffeinated drink, and all the culture that goes with that. The beards, the kind of the nice aesthetics in cafes, which is interesting, isn't it? That people would do that.
It's happening right now. So the camera is trained on me, and behind me is neat. Outside of the range of the camera is like clutter and all kinds of stuff, and so like people are getting to see, Dave's got a very organized, neat kind of house. And no, just the bit that's behind me. And it was like, me and Lizzie, my wife, were joking when we moved into our house, but it was true. It's like we moved into this house, and because streaming's become such a big thing and necessary for doing church now, one of our first questions was, well, which backdrop are we going to stream in front of? And it was like, what world is this that we're living in? This has changed very, very quickly.
Yeah.
And I've got this week we've got a friend who I was on her Instagram page, and noticed, she's got about 200 followers or whatever, and this is like her general Instagram page where she puts up updates about her life and all that kind of stuff. And then we noticed a link on it, so me and Lizzie were on it, and we clicked through, and she runs this other Instagram page for her 2 cats or 2 kittens, which have 10,000 followers. She started that account like less than a year ago, and I'm like,
that's got to be disheartening, hasn't it?
Isn't it?
That your cats have got. Do you know? I do love it though when something odd will go on, and somebody there'll be some kind of gaffe on TV, or somebody will say something kind of slightly risky. Something will happen, and then somebody creates a Twitter account or an Instagram account for that particular thing. It's always it's very quick as well, isn't it? Somebody, and then they'll have tens of thousands of followers within minutes. It's quite impressive stuff, really.
Oh no, it does happen like that. But that's the thing, is like, it's a reward system. So it like, you create some kind of identity or some kind of image that people like, and you get rewarded for it. You get follows, you get likes, and so therefore you're actually encouraged to kind of build up this kind of created identity thing.
And that feedback loop is very quick, isn't it? And and it's one of the things that scientists are saying, that it's quite dangerous for, and I sound like an old man, but young people's brains who haven't formed fully, that actually we don't know what it's doing to them, because the whole time that our phones are made to bleep and to blink and to flash, and those feedback loops are there very quickly, and they build those into the programs, and actually we don't know what it's doing to young people's minds, that they're constantly looking for the how many likes have I got, how many love hearts have I got for my picture, how many things are happening, and they're if that doesn't happen, then they're in a mess. And I love it. Is it that Black Mirror episode where they have their whole world is built on the rating systems that they get? Have you seen that one?
Yeah.
They kind of, where Black Mirror takes it to. I mean, people were saying 2020 they'd really outdone themselves this year by, rather than putting the next season, actually this is the next season of Black Mirror 2020, which tickled me. It was one of those memes that went around. But it taken it to an extreme level, where basically, depending on your social media score, you could get into parties or not, you could book flights or not. But actually, we're doing that's maybe on a micro level, whereby that we're kind of living that, aren't we, in terms of what we're doing with that stuff.
Yeah, and it's incredibly fragmented as an identity. We a while ago we were trying to, like, we were doing some youth work, and we were like, okay, so which social media platforms and stuff are young people on today? And they weren't on Facebook, so we were chatting to them about what they were on and all that kind of thing. It's like, well, why are you not on Facebook? It's interesting, they weren't on Facebook because that would mean that they would have to be the same person to their parents as to their friends. It's essentially they can break up their identity. They can present different selves to different kind of people. And one of the writers we both like, Mark Sayers, in one of his books, was talking about this idea of fragmented identity. And he used the example of Michael Jackson, how people would talk about, young Michael Jackson in the Jackson 5, and he's so happy. And then, Thriller Michael Jackson, so creative and all that kind of thing. And then, reclusive Michael Jackson, and the more unfortunate, darker side of Michael Jackson, and then the deteriorating kind of Michael Jackson. And people would talk about it like they were different people, and then saying how they were sad that almost like the young Michael Jackson had died, and like no one ever kind of noticing or recognizing that this was one person. This wasn't 5 different people. This was a single human being with should be one identity. But we've got so used to breaking ourselves up and breaking others up that you end up with this fragmented identity. And I can imagine only more fragmented when augmented by this kind of like social media reality, where you get rewarded for certain behaviors, and then you have to kind of perform for everyone to kind of achieve. And I think the thing that's quite scary is in China, that's actually now a real thing in parts of China where they've got an actual ranking system for people based on your behavior and things, and that will or will not give you access to social levels and all that kind of thing. So they kind of, it's like they saw that episode of Black Mirror and went, actually, that's a good idea.
Yeah, how can we put more control on our huge population? I know, yeah, let's rank people through that. But it is subtle, isn't it? Because it obviously happens in the West as well. That, you know, we talked, didn't we, about freedom and we talked about shame as well. But, you know, if you do the wrong thing on social media, actually that comes back to can come back to bite you in a massive way. So therefore, there are incentives and disincentives to present particular things, aren't there? And I mean, you know, I suppose you and I experience that on a smaller scale. You know, if you're up the front of a church speaking in front of people, then you may be inclined to present one part of yourself, even though you've just had a massive row with your wife just before you started, or you've had a horrendous night, you know, kind of, you know, for me with the kids, or, you know, you can kind of pretend to be wonderful, and actually we're as broken and sinful as everybody else, and we come for God's forgiveness and to experience his grace. But there is a danger. And I mean, one of the things I probably get in trouble for this really, but one of the things I do is as a church, when we say sorry together, I always use the word us. And I know, you know, some people haven't understand the priest doesn't say us, they say you, but I always say us because I'm like, I'm part of this. You know, I've got, I need to say sorry too. Like, you know, I've got stuff I need to deal with. But there is a danger, I think, the bigger the audience gets, that you I know one of the guys we really liked, talks about undefended leadership, and he talks about having a front stage and a backstage. And the front stage is what you project to the world, and the backstage is the bits that you hide from the world and kind of what goes on behind the scenes. And he says for Christian leaders, moral failure occurs when the front stage and the backstage become disconnected. You know, so on the front, they might be shiny and, you know, doing massive prayer meetings and seeing the church grow. And on the back, you know, they're secretly watching pornography. They're secretly, you know, kind of rowing with their spouse. They're secretly embezzling money. They're, you know, all these things are going on. And as they become more and more disconnected, you end up with two selves, and then people end up with nervous breakdowns. There's massive moral failure, go off and have affairs. And you see it time and time again. And yeah, and I think that's trying to present something that isn't, you know, you almost got two different selves going on there, haven't you?
Yeah. And it's because, you know, in a large way, like you can't actually be fully honest with everyone all the time. So there is like there's a healthy level to that, right? Where, you know, if every week I got up in front of church and I was like, you know, poured out every single mess and question I had and stuff, and that would then no longer be helpful to people, or building
public counselling in a really awkward way.
Yeah. I think, in fact, when we were talking about this in college, I seem to remember at some point the phrase "leaky backstage" came up, and that.
Yes, it was. Yeah, I mean, it was an image that perhaps we didn't need, but it was probably a realistic image, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, is that all I can? So there is a healthy part of this, which is like, I'm not going to completely bare my soul to everybody all times everywhere. That's probably not helpful either. And I know, so reading, finally getting around to actually reading one of Brené Brown's books, because Lizzie obsesses about it, and she said so much, I feel like I don't need to read them. So I was like, I shall actually read one. And actually, I'm glad I read her latest book, because she's saying she's the vulnerability lady. She's the one who made it all so popular. And she's like, people seem to think that
what from some TED Talks, wasn't she? She was a TED Talk lady, yeah. Yeah,
TED Talk lady, did a talk all about vulnerability, and it just kind of blew up, and then became, you know, more talks and books and all that kind of thing. And I found that stuff a lot helpful, but it was really interesting actually reading that latest book, where she said, you know, people seem to think she's telling people just to pour out the deepest, darkest secrets to complete strangers. And she's like, yeah, don't do that. That's a terrible idea. There is like this kind of appropriate kind of vulnerability and all that kind of thing. Yeah. So there is a place to be, you know, and obviously, like when you're talking to a child, there's certain things you should never say, and there's an appropriate way to do that. And even C.S. Lewis, in one of his essays, was talking about the fact that when any two people come together, you get a new personality, a hybrid personality of those two people. And whenever two different people talk, you're always going to get a different style of conversation coming up. So that's the kind of healthy side of it. But then I guess the unhealthy side is we started off by talking about all these films about true identity, like who you really are and discovering that. And we have phrases in our culture like finding yourself and being true to yourself. And we've talked about this a lot previously, this whole kind of search for the authentic self, who you truly are. And it's a bit of an obsession. And actually, as we've talked so far, I just realized that the world that we live in, this particular culture, is all about that. It's all about preaching that and being true to yourself and all that kind of thing. But actually,
you do you, Dave.
You do you, all that kind of thing. But actually, the pressures in reality are enormous to conform to everyone's expectations. That we actually, so that the actual lived experience is quite different. I wonder if there's something in that tension or that tearing that it's causing in people to be, on the one hand told that to be true to yourself and authentic is the most important thing, and then to have all of these pressures to perform in order to get the likes, in order to be approved of, in order to meet and all that kind of thing, and whether that's actually quite an unhealthy place to live in.
It's interesting because I guess if you, there's a view of the self, isn't there, that if you drill down into the middle of somebody, you're going to find this true, authentic self sitting in there. And they just need to drill down enough and they will find that, which is one way of viewing stuff. And but I think on the other side, you're saying there's this kind of construction that's going on. So you've got these, true, authentic self sitting in there somewhere. If we kind of drill down enough, you're going to find it. And the other side is this, if, kind of putting these things together and presenting this stuff, which seem to be in contradiction with one another. And I think, the construction thing, I think another thought on that is if you don't actually know who you are, then somebody can sell you an identity, which we see time and time again, don't we, in adverts? Very, very, the best advertising doesn't tell you the specs of the thing they're trying to sell. They show you the lifestyle that you can have when you have that product. So Apple would be classic. Kind of links always used to make me chuckle because it was very popular in change rooms at school. But actually, and I think there was a slight parody of it. If you wear links, then you'll get all the women. But there is something in that they do that in advertising, isn't there? If you get this thing, and there's that whole is it that you can pronounce it Danish huggy. Yeah, hygge, where basically you get lots of people, beautiful people sat around some pine furniture in beautiful woodland. They try and sell you this whole lifestyle thing. But actually, people, if you don't know your identity, then they can try and sell one to you. Is that fair?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, like I remember someone commenting on how, like at the start of lockdown, and do you remember when everyone went nuts for toilet roll? It was 4 to 5 months ago.
Because coronavirus has a massive impact on people's. Did they not realise it was a respiratory virus? I mean, it wasn't a diarrhea thing that I've heard at all in any of the symptoms anywhere.
Yeah. But for some reason, people went nuts for toilet roll. And this person was kind of reflecting on the fact that, all that mattered at that point was that you could get some toilet roll. But just a few weeks before that, you could get 30 different types of toilet roll. And like one would be all about, this is environmentally friendly and stuff. So that's like appealing to someone who wants to show the world that they're responsible and in touch with the environment, all that kind of thing. And then there's, luxury toilet roll. And that's someone who's like, I spend a bit more money on nice things. And then, there's the economy toilet roll, I'm all about, so even toilet roll is kind of like pitched to different identities. And that's, we all know what that gets used for. And it is essentially the same stuff, but it's like, they could still dress it up to mean all this different stuff. And you see it all time and time again, these products that are essentially the same, from clothing especially, like just given all of this meaning. And like if you have this brand, this certain type of clothing, then you are this type of person. It's that you are buying identity in. So we've got two things going on here. We've got identity that comes from the outside and is kind of given to you, and then we've got this identity that is expected to be found within you or is constructed. It's the kind of like the true self, the who you become, expressing yourself, the value of expressing. And I think the way it's traditionally been divided is that historically all identity was given. Like it was just You were born in a place to a family, and you even had your job for life. Like that was it. You know, if your surname was Smith, is because your family were blacksmiths, and that's it. You were a blacksmith. Like no one did anything different, and that's the way it was. And you lived where you lived, and probably your parents told you who you married, and like your identity was just, you know, completely given. There was no freedom in that whatsoever. Your religion was their religion, and so on and so on and so on. And to the point we've got now, where it's actually the opposite, where everything is actually about identity construction. So it comes from within. So it's either this discovery or creativity thing, which I actually think are the same thing. Where
Go on, hit me. That sounds deep.
Doesn't it? Well, I did. So I thought, I've been thinking about that one for quite a while, but it's because so my wife's a writer and known a few creatives and artists and stuff like that. And one of the things I notice when people write about the creativity process is, like, quite often they'll talk about it as a discovery process. So even though they're painting a painting that no one has ever seen before or anything like that, they will talk about it as if that painting was always there and they just had to find it. And when I saw people talking about that, about works of art, I was like, I wonder if that's the same thing that's going on with identity. So we've got this big value on people should be free to express themselves however they want to express themselves. That's a particular cultural thing that's happening right now. And we also have this high value on discovering who you truly are. And I actually wonder whether those are just basically different language for the same thing. Like the discovery process is the creativity process. You know, for an artist to say like something that they've made that's completely original was found, you know, it does to me sound like that's maybe the same thing. You know, people might not realize it's the same thing, but I wonder if it is actually the same thing. It's coming from the same place, and probably then has its roots in romanticism and that whole thing of the importance of expression and connection to nature and all that kind of thing.
Yeah. That's some of your deep thoughts, bringing things together, Dave, there.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that one for a while. Actually, I've realized I've never actually spoken about that one before, but
never verbalized. This is like that moment. You could say, this episode of this. Yeah. And so, but it is interesting, is it, that in the mix of this, I think a lot of people do. I think a lot of us do struggle with our identity. You know, we kind of, whether it's creation or discovery, for lots of people, there's an ambiguity about it. There's a kind of it's a vagueness about it, or an unsettledness. You know, and I think, we're not going to touch on the hot potato issues, but there is all sorts of things going on there, aren't there, about identity. Oh, have we got a huge comment there?
We do have a. Okay, from Chris. Definitely an interesting topic. Nice one, guys. I reckon in this age of technology, we've lost touch with our identities through disconnecting with our environment. I find that a quick fix mentality and a need for instant satisfaction has made us think we're above our environment, which is where our natural spiritual identity traditionally comes from, if that makes sense. That does make sense, Chris. Thank you very much. That's really helpful. Yeah, it's this. Yeah, it's true that the moment that we start creating, discovering an identity, then it is, it's essentially not fiction, but it's disconnected from the rest of the world, isn't it? It's disconnected from reality. We've entered a different space there, where, you know, if identity is no longer given, then literally anything's up for grabs. And I know, like, Andy, you said you want to kind of avoid the hot button kind of issues before we end up getting trolled to death. But if we take some of the kind of identity stuff that's happening in the world to its extreme conclusion, and we've chatted about this before offline, is, you know, someone could say, I am a tabby cat, you know, and no one can tell me otherwise. That's who I am. I'm going to wander around the alleyways of Waterloo, completely naked, hunting mice and eating cat food. And you can't tell me otherwise, because I am a tabby cat. And kind of like the current moral is that's the truth. But in order to do that, you have to essentially disconnect from reality, from the kind of facts of biology and what's kind of determining you as a human being. Whereas, you know, people go, that's a human being, and we've kind of got to the place now where I said, well, you can't say that to anyone. Like, anyone can construct their identities. But if we just using that as the most extreme thing we can kind of imagine, just to say there's got to be something in the fact there's got to be a limit to identity construction. There's got to be a bit where it actually has some kind of bearing on real life at some point.
Yes, there has to be a connection, and I think, we as Christians would, because we see the world as created by God, however that came together, people have different understandings about that, but certainly we're going to do the science one at some point. We just haven't got there yet. But because we believe the world is created by God and we believe it's actually there, and therefore we would want to say that creation says something to us about who we are and why we were made. Does that make sense? I think that there has to be a connection to reality. We can't just go, as you say, like I'm a cat, or I'm a teddy bear, or I'm a tree. That it just becomes completely disconnected from reality. Or I can't remember if we spoke about it last week, the freedom thing we did when it's Zootropolis, where you can be whatever you want to be, regardless of your physical or mental capacity. So I could say, I want to be a world-class brain surgeon, and actually, academically, I probably don't have the ability to do that. Or I could say, I'm going to be the next Stephen Hawking, and you can't tell me otherwise. Well, actually, I probably can't be the next Stephen Hawking because he was an absolute genius, and I'm not on his level, and therefore be unable to do that. So there has to be a connection to reality, and I think to place that in front of people without any connection to reality is actually going to set people up in a very bad way. I mean, the positive side is some restrictions that are placed on people are restrictions we wouldn't want to place on people. So I think we said last week, didn't we, about freedom, that if in the past, if you were female, if you were a minority, your ethnic minority, if you had a particular orientation, there would have been all sorts of restrictions placed on you, which many of which we would want to say, actually, no, you need to remove those. And those are good things. Those have been taken away. But at the same time, when you take it to its nth degree, there's just a disconnection from the real world going on.
Yeah, completely. And it's I kind of want to talk about a dictionary. So, like in a dictionary, words have meaning as they're defined by other words. So a dictionary defines words, and it uses words to define words. So it's kind of like everything has its meaning in relation to other things in the dictionary. It's the only way we can understand language. It all kind of, and then you get into things like semantic fields. So, like tree, bush, shrub, like they all kind of belong in the same semantic field. And, all this kind of, like, all words have relations to each other, and certain words function as, and all that kind of stuff. But basically, like, a word on its own doesn't mean anything because it doesn't live within a system. And I guess it's saying with external identity, it's acknowledging that we live within a system, that we are connected to other things, and what we mean is affected by the things we're connected to. And we've got to a point now culturally where we've gone to the extreme point of saying I should be able to say I'm anything I want to be. And maybe I think we're both saying we need to push back a bit, at least a bit on that, because you are connected to other people and you are connected to the world, and there are limitations and there are truths about who you are, and you can't be able to say everything. And I think one of the things that shows it up is, people are saying I'm free to be who I want to be, I should express myself as much as I am, and I'm gonna do a ton of online quiz which tells me which house in Hogwarts I belong to, and which
my daughter made me do that the other day. I found that out just this last week. That was, and they sent me an email as well.
Yeah because so we're at your house, and the kids were desperate to find out which Hogwarts house you belong to. I think I was
Ravenclaw.
Ravenclaw, there we go. So it's this people are also desperate, and in certain circles, I think our circles, the Enneagram has taken off massively, which is an ancient personality typing system where you're 1 through 9, you're one of those numbers, and that number tells you who you are. And then all this kind of, like, so people are actually desperate to be told who they are. They will, like we said, they'll buy into identities as well to construct, like, so actually we're constantly reaching for identities, maybe because we've stripped away the ones that are kind of existing. So we've got a few comments relating to all of this. So I've got two from Tom, who's brought up one of those things that we were carefully sidestepping just so we didn't get trolled to death. So in the interest of not putting petrol on that particular bonfire for this evening, we're going to sidestep is gender a social construct. But to pick up on this thing of how truth has become relative, Tom's saying postmodernists would say that 2 + 2 = 5. It's this whole idea that truth is whatever you want it to be now, which, you know, people have been saying for a long time is always in the end an idea that's going to eat itself, because you can't even define itself by that kind of idea. And then Rachel Bond, you might know her, says we tend to say whatever makes you happy, and that doesn't stand up to scrutiny, which is, yeah, a really good point, Rach, actually, that you know, one of the underlying kind of claims or promises to this is, you know, do whatever makes you happy, but the end result is not happiness when you do whatever impulse comes along in that moment. And I know, like, oh wait, what is it, 41 minutes for the first Tim Keller reference, I think.
You've done well.
I know, that's pretty good, isn't it? So 41 minutes, Tim Keller. One of his things was saying, you know, when people are saying be true to yourself, his question back is which self? You know, you will change enormously through your lifetime. And, you know, for people who are married and you are with this one person for decades of your life, what you will see is this person change. Like, you know, the saying, you're not the person I married, we would expect to always be true in every marriage at some point, because everyone is changing all the time. So it's, you know, it's which self are you supposed to be being true to? So Andy, we've got these two sources of identity. We've got the external, the identity given to you. You've got the internal, which is created. And, you know, we would say there is a third source of identity, which is gospel identity. It's the identity that comes from Jesus and the Jesus movement from God. And what is that about, and how is it different to those other two?
Yeah, so I think a number of people have kind of highlighted it in quite a simple way, really. So they would say that the things we've been talking about in the way that we construct or discover is those identities are achieved, whereas the identity that we get from God is something that is received. And we've talked before, we've said that the gospel is about, and when we say gospel, it's the good news about Jesus, is about what God has done for us in Jesus Christ, in Jesus coming to live a perfect life, and, you know, live the life that we're meant to live, die the death we're meant to die, and raising from the dead and defeating death and sin and all of that stuff. So that's kind of the good news about Jesus, and in response we get a relationship with God, and we get to live with him both now and for eternity. And part of that is that we get a new identity, that we become sons or daughters and sons of the King of Kings, of the creator of the universe, that we become children of God, that we know the reason that we're made and created, and it's not something that we earn. And I think so often people who've brushed up against the Christian faith think that if you go to church, if you read your Bible, if you say your prayers, if you kind of, you know, if your number of good deeds outweigh your number of bad deeds, then you might get to heaven or whatever. But the Christian faith, you know, that's religion, whereas actually the Christian faith is about God's grace, God's undeserved favor, God's unmerited favor, and therefore what our identity is received from God, it's not achieved. We become sons and daughters of God by receiving his grace, by accepting his forgiveness, by confessing the stuff that we screwed up on, and we receive that identity from him. And what's incredible about it is because it's not achieved, in that sense, I don't have to worry and go, oh my goodness, have I got it? Oh my goodness, have I done enough? Oh my goodness, you know, am I presenting myself right on Instagram? Oh, you know, am I wearing the right clothes? Oh, am I earning enough in my job? It's so countercultural. You know, even wonderful things like family. Well, you know, family let you down, friends let you down. You know, whereas God doesn't. And so I think the identity received from him is it is a third way. It's a completely different form of identity. And when people grasp that, time and time again, we've seen that to be life-changing. You know, people who have had horrendous backgrounds, lives turning around, people who've been kind of, and it doesn't mean that everything becomes good when you become a Christian, don't get me wrong, but actually God can when their identity is in who God made them and their relationship with Him, something changes at a very fundamental level.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I think there's a couple of bits of language in the New Testament, the second half of the Bible, kind of Jesus and after Jesus, that I think kind of illustrate this truth that come to my mind immediately. I think like one is the language of adoption, which is used a couple of times in the Bible about what it means to be a Christian, and writing a letter about this, which is recorded in the Bible. The language that's reached for is this one of adoption. And when you think about adoption, like a child who's adopted has no say in their adoption. It's something that's done to them. It's something that's given to them. And I know at least in the UK's legal system, and it was the case in the ancient world when this was written, is that you get a new, well, in the UK now, you literally get a new birth certificate. You get a whole new identity, you get a new surname. And in the ancient world, when it was written, when you were adopted, you were fully a child of that family. You got the family name, you carried on the family business, you got all the rights and access and everything. And the person who got that didn't earn it, didn't do anything to get it. It's granted, it's given. This whole new identity is given to this person, and everything that's inferred with it. And the other one is, it comes from a comment I remember from college, that someone saying that they thought the most common name for Christians in the New Testament wasn't Christian or disciple or any of those things. It was in Christ. It's this this phrase that comes up all the time in the New Testament, talking about Christians as those who are in Christ, which is something that is inside something else. It is completely defined.
Well, what's the Nicky Gumbel illustration? He does this, doesn't he, on Alpha? He kind of takes his little book and he puts something in it and he closes it and he's like, it's like that, isn't it? It's kind of been in Christ in that way.
That's the one, yeah. It's like completely enveloped. And so therefore, when you see that thing, all you see is the thing surrounding that thing. So it's that idea when, if you are in Christ, when God sees us, which is already getting very complex because whole Trinitarian stuff. But when we know, let's say God the Father sees us, he sees God the Son, he sees Jesus, he sees that perfect righteousness, like all of that kind of language, all that. It's like his identity becomes our identity. We are seen, as him type thing. And so those are the two things that kind of spring to my mind. Have you got any others that you can think of that talk this idea of identity and what it means?
Yeah, I mean, I think the union with Christ, the in Christ thing, is so important, and the fact that God doesn't look upon, where we screw up, but He sees the good things that Jesus did in our place if we've received Him, and which is huge. I think the adoption thing, becoming part of His family, and obviously for so many people, family can be a wonderful thing, but family can also be a really hard thing or a really messy thing for us. And we've got to be careful not to project our negative experiences of human family onto our perfect Father, because some of us won't have had, all of us have got fathers that fail, but some of us will have fathers or mothers that will have not done such a good job in different ways. And I think, there's example, isn't there, as you say, of giving a new name. I remember hearing a story of a guy, I think it was on The Monastery, which was a TV program a few years ago, where these guys went on, and they weren't Christians, but they went to this monastery and they had lots of silence and stuff. And then one of the spiritual directors, one of the monks, I think it was, or something like that, gave the guy a stone with, said, look, this is your new name. And it just really floored the guy. Like, he had a deep experience of God. And he wasn't a person that came from a Christian background at all. And the Bible talks about us receiving a new name. So I think that's in there as well. I'm sure there's some other things, but off the top of my head, I'm struggling to think of anything immediately in terms of that. But I think it is the fact it's received and not achieved is so countercultural to everything that we know of. It just flips it upside down. In a way, and I remember we did a whole series. Was it last year? It must have been autumn last year. Identity at my kind of previous church, St. Werburgh's, and for students, it was just huge. Like, again and again and again. For so many of them, they're just. They're at an age where they're trying to find themselves, but these are followers of Jesus, but just keep drawing us back to that, that those truths, that actually once you follow Jesus, you're in Christ, you're known, you're loved, you're beloved, you're a son or daughter of the King, and it's freeing in an incredible way.
It is. I've got a comment here from Joe. I think one reason those online identity quizzes are so popular is that we want to feel that somebody else understands us. We want to read the little description at the end of the quiz and think, that's so true, that's who I am. It's that kind of that comforting kind of feeling of being seen and known and kind of accepted. And I think, again, that's maybe one of those things where the gospel identity comes in a different way, in which you are seen and known and accepted, but then given a new identity. So it's not, it's very imperfect metaphor, but it's this idea of, like if someone was an addict, you would love them, but you would not want them to remain in that state of being a mess, but you would want to give them a fresh start, a new identity, way of beginning, that you wouldn't want them to be known as like that addict anymore type thing. And it's that similar kind of thing. And it's interesting. I think one of the things that happens with gospel identity is it does actually end up warring with both of these things, both the internal and external identity stuff. So in traditional cultures, as we read in the Bible, for some people this meant losing out on their family. And in traditional cultures today, that still happens. Those who would convert to Christianity, it's often seen as shaming to the family, and they would lose the relationship with their family. They can lose their job and all sorts of things. So it wars with certain external identities, certain given external identities. You cannot carry on as this anymore if you want to be in Christ. And then it also wars against the kind of internal thing as well. I keep thinking of that teaching of Jesus of, those who want to save their lives will lose it. Those who lose their lives for my sake will save it or find it. So that you say, those who will find their lives, find their true selves, find their identities, if you want to insert that, are those who will lose it, which again is so different, such a different way into the way that we understand identity and identity formation is like, rather than it coming from with inside, it's actually letting go of all that stuff. Even, killing it off is kind of some of the language the Bible uses in order for this identity to kind of flood in. There's a quote I heard this week that I've not heard before. It's quite powerful about, if your heart and your life is full of created things, there is no room for God. It's kind of like when you let go of all that other identity stuff, it then leaves the space for God's identity to come in and fill us. And so I think there's something about a gospel identity that will also war against both of these other types of identity formation.
Yeah, and I like what you said before a minute ago, and I think this is one of the things I've been reflecting on quite a bit recently, that there is and I think we probably mentioned it before, but we are both, when we're followers in the way of Jesus, when we're Christians, or whatever phrase you want to use, we're both more sinful than we know, and more loved and accepted in Jesus than we can possibly imagine at the very same time. And I mean, I love quoting that again and again, because for me, it's that thing, isn't it, that God loves us as we are, but he doesn't want us to stay that way. He wants us to become more like Jesus. He wants our lives to journey towards him. And I think the Bible is very honest about those two things. That we things can be very, very messy, but also, God doesn't call us to stay there. He wants us to walk out of that and walk towards him into a new identity. So it's not that God doesn't love us when things are a mess. Of course he does, but he's calling us to something better the whole time. And actually this whole issue of identity is calling us to something new. And it doesn't mean that we don't use our social medias, but I think we'd want to use them to communicate and celebrate, but not to hide. I think, it's not that we don't want to buy nice things or look smart or wear clothes that look good, but actually we don't want them to cover up or pretend to be something different than we are. I think it's not that we will be totally the same with every person we're at, because I think you said, as C.S. Lewis says, that different people bring different things out of us. But I think at the core, if we're followers of Jesus, there will always be that reality, that solid foundation that we stand on, that we know we're sons and daughters of the King, and we know we're loved by him. And so whether I walk in, I don't know about you, but when I walk into a new pub where I don't know anybody, I'm all, particularly as a local pub, I'm always a bit like, and you kind of don't know how to act or how to be because you don't know people in there. But whether you walk into a new pub, whether you walk into a new gym or a new club where you don't know people actually, or a new workplace is always quite intimidating, or a new group of friends, wherever you go, there can be a foundation in the center that you're loved and known, and and therefore it's okay. You don't have to put on some kind of mask or show, because God's got it. He's got you. He holds you. He knows you. He loves you.
Yeah, and it's that the Bible starts off with a story of a couple who do something wrong, and then hide, and then clothe themselves to hide themselves from each other, from God specifically. And then you fast forward to a teaching of Jesus where he's don't worry about what you will wear, and it's kind of this whole thing of like, actually, like you say, the acceptance and the love is already there 100%, and we have such a hard time getting our heads around the fact that it's not performance based, that it genuinely there is no test with God. He's simply waiting and ready for us to kind of give ourselves to him. But in doing so, then you have to let go of all these other ways in which we've constructed our identities. Like that, in a way, that's it's the Adam and Eve stuff again. All this stuff that we've constructed are layers on layers and layers that we've built over our true selves, if you want to call it that. And then actually God's like, strip all that back. Already love the person who's underneath all that stuff. I'm going to be the one who clothes you. And that's what happens in that story of Adam and Eve as well. They clothe themselves, and then God says, no, I'm going to be the one to clothe you. And he does that. It's that kind of thing of like, put away all the fig leaves that are covering up what's actually going on with you. Love you completely, could not love you less. Now let me clothe you. Let me be the one who gives you the identity. That's the kind of thing that's happening. And it's so different from traditional cultures where you've got to live up to the mark. You've got to keep the family name good and true, and you've got to behave in a certain way. And then it's different from the world we're in now, where you've got to fully express yourself and do all both of which are performative identities, both of which says if you don't make the mark, if you don't do certain things, then you will be judged. Whereas with God, it's the other way around. It's the acceptance first, and then the identity comes after the acceptance. And I know I still struggle with that. I still find myself performing for others and performing for God, even though I should know that I don't. But it is this totally different dynamic.
Yeah, we've had quite a lot of interaction from people tonight, haven't we? There's been quite a few comments.
It's hit
some blasts for the past. It's Leon. Amazing.
Delving into the identity aspect is a new one on me, but very interesting. Plenty of food for thought received from this live stream. Many thanks and God bless. Thanks for watching, Leon. It's great to have you with us. Well, this is actually going to be the last episode of season 1. We're going to lean into the whole Netflix metaphor and call this season 1. It started as a bit of an experiment, but we've connected with some great people. We've made some new friends literally through this. And had some really great chats, and I've discovered stuff that I didn't know I knew, which is like really interesting. It's been really good to do this, and we are 100% going to come back and do season 2, aren't we?
We are, yeah. And I think there's been a few. I mean, you never know. You might even get us on those hot potato topics, which people have raised at some point. I think we probably need to address some of those ethical things, which, yeah. I one of the things I was thinking actually, if this is stuff that has kind of you found helpful, there's 3 books I think I'd love to recommend to people, which I think we've referenced on a number of occasions, and 2 of them are from a man we've mentioned a lot. So one would be Reason for God by Tim Keller, which is kind of looking at the rational, that faith isn't irrational. The second one is Making Sense of God, and there's 2 chapters on identity, and some of this if you read it, you'll see have been picked up, or listen to it on Audible, have been picked up. So it's Making Sense of God, an invitation to the skeptical, and he kind of pushes back on a number of things and says, look, beauty and freedom and morality and identity make more sense in a Christian worldview than they do in an atheistic one. It's a fascinating read, whether you're a person of faith or not. And then the third one would be, I think we mentioned it last week, is Confronting Christianity by an incredible lady called Rebecca McLaughlin. And she looks at 12 of the hardest questions that people pose about the Christian faith. And I think both authors unpack this stuff far better than we do in our ramblings on a Thursday night. But you can listen to them on Audible, or you could download them or buy even paper copies if you so wish. But I'd thoroughly recommend those as places to go. And you'll probably see where we got half our stuff from.
Yeah, totally. And it's worth saying there is a distinct difference between two friends having a chat and seeing what comes up compared to someone who pours themselves into carefully sculpting a book.
That is probably true. Yeah, that is fair. Yeah. This is not a dissertation. This is a bit of a chat on a live stream. You never know quite where it's going to go.
If it was, it did not get a good mark, but we had a lot of fun making it. Also, if you're a bit of a visual person or whatever, and we mentioned C.S. Lewis a lot. If you go onto YouTube, there's a channel called C.S. Lewis Doodles, where they take chapters from C.S. Lewis's book and kind of doodle it out as it's read, and it's brilliant. I absolutely love it. Kind of brings some of his stuff to life. So that's worth it if you've got it's 15, 20 minutes per chapter. And it's beautiful, and it's great, and it kind of sheds a new light on it. So I would recommend that. The other thing as well is we've talked so much about Alpha because it's such a good course. It's this course where you watch a video about some aspect of Christianity, and then basically you sit in a small group and you chat through all of that stuff, and it's all about you talking it through. And the people running it just listen. It's all about you getting a chance to figure out what it is you believe. Talk about what you believe with other people who are kind of like-minded and also on a discovery journey. And Storyhouse are running Alpha, and we are going to be doing it. Let me just check. I know it's in September. I'm just going to double check. It is on Wednesday.
In September.
Yeah, Wednesday the 23rd of September. We're doing it in the evening, starting at 8 p.m. and we're doing it on Zoom, so you can literally do it from your home. All you need is
amazing.
A phone.
So anyone can join you.
Anyone can join us at all. And if you want to sign up, you just go to storyhouse.community, which is our website /alpha, and you put in your name, your email address there. And then when it gets close to the time, we will send you the link to the Zoom chat. And it is, an hour and 15 Wednesday evenings to talk about basically the most important stuff in life. So if your curiosity has been piqued by any of this and you want to talk it through, get a chance to really talk and not just add in the comments, then I would really recommend that. In fact, I'd pop it back up again, storyhouse.community /alpha. So that's 5 weeks away, I think that is. So get on that. Cool. So Andy, end of the season, we will be back, but is there anything you want to say? Any final words of wisdom?
No, it's just been a lot of fun, really. I mean, it was an experiment, wasn't it? And then it's kind of carried on. And I've it is kind of nerve wracking, kind of being here and going, oh, we're going to talk what we say, or we're going to talk about what people are going to say. But it's been a lot of fun. So thank you so much for joining us, particularly this evening. It's been an amazing number of comments. So thank you. It's been really good fun.
Yeah, no, it's been absolutely extraordinary. And I think the only thing I'd say is if you are genuinely interested in this stuff, keep searching, keep talking, keep reading, keep watching, all of that kind of thing. I know both Andy and myself would be more than happy to sit down and have a chat with someone who's genuinely asking these questions. We kind of live for that. We would put other stuff aside to do it. So you can get in touch with me through Storyhouse, Facebook, Instagram, and our website. If you contact us through any of those mediums, they can get back to me or someone else if you want to chat to them. And Andy, where can they find you at?
Yeah, at STF Mackworth on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. At STF Mackworth. We'd love to just drop us a DM or whatever. Particularly if you're in the Mackworth area, we'd love to meet you.
Awesome. That's great. And so for the last time in season 1, is there more to life than Netflix, which hopefully we've shown there is. Let's roll the end credits. Thanks so much for joining us.